مساء الخير وأسعد الله أوقاتكم جميعا. I've been asked to begin, so I'm going to listen to the orders I've been given and start straight away. Before I introduce our speaker, just want to say how delighted I am to see you here. I speak on behalf of the Doha Institute. So welcome to the Doha Institute. I know that you've been hosted by the center, but you have also come across many of my colleagues as discussants. So this is maybe a late but a warm welcome to you from the Doha Institute. Now you know the drill. I don't really need to tell you anything. I've been coached into what to do and what maybe to say. So let me begin by introducing our speaker, Saad Ahmad. Saad Ahmad received his PhD degree from Center for West Asian Studies in the School of International Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University in India. I think you all must know that this is the most distinguished university in India. And at the same time, it has been also in the news recently, very recently, leading the demonstrations against the appalling rule to act in a way that excludes people from the purview of Indian citizenship. He is working on his book, Discourse of Salafism in the Arab World. He is also a part of the Contending Modernities, a project at the University of Notre Dame, and has recently joined as a research assistant at Jamia Milliya Islamiyya in New Delhi. The topic is the sectarian turn in the discourse of Salafism, the case of India. So please welcome him and please do start. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. So thank you, Arab Center. You provided this opportunity to speak and learn many things from here. I mean, before coming here, I was in, you can imagine about a person who is coming from a siege. So there is university siege in India, in Delhi, in Jamia Milliya Islamiyya and in Jawaharlal Nehru University. So, but there is not that much siege that can cage my ideas. So, I'm interested in the discourses of Salafism and the Arab world, and this is my PhD work. So, but the sectarian turn is something which came suddenly, not exactly suddenly, but for 7 to 8 years. So, so this is more of what I could do in my PhD was a sort of philosophical understanding of Salafism through the not exactly from picking some ideas from the market or capitalist produced ideas. So I provided a definition in here. So as 3 generations of early Islam elaborate on the concept of Salafism, it contains pre-Islamic practices, culture, memories, and sense of doing good and bad. There are explanations in Quran and Sunnah about the idea of Salafism, which provides a kind of tautology understandable to human being. So please don't get offended, because for me, Salafism is not a very small project, and one can imagine the idea of Salafism, in different communities as well, as maybe Shara often advocate. So there is certain Salafism in Shia, Salafism in Sunni, Salafism in India as well. Or we often discuss that there is a kind of Salafism, Brahmin Salafism, which is found during the famous traveler who is known as Al-Bairuni. He has mentioned various things about the Brahmin Salafism. Not exactly Salafism, but sort of imagination is there. So these are creative things which I just wanted to discuss with you. The crucial requirement for being a Salafi is shaped by virtue of being righteous. Thus, righteousness is a subject which connects people with the sense of truth and its perception. The social presence of righteousness means living with the truth. it means that the past is a continuous story added to a human mind. Most of truths come from the past, as there are various recent Western studies on Salafism which sometimes tries to put it into a broader historical project, which says that Salafism is actually about going to the past, going to the 7th century. So one cannot escape the past. In our time, people who consider Salaf as ideals, you may find them that they treat the past as their present. Hence, one can take it as a conceptual understanding of Salafism as well. So one can feel that there is a philosophy of understanding in Salafism involved in this definition. So we have been discussing here the positionality of the paper, by Martin and Martin and Toby here, which says that a general reader, here I have tried, if the Salafi discursivity, I just tried to mention about that Salafi discursivity is part of the thesis, was developed through methodological tool, philosophical in nature. So the thesis mainly tried to deal with the idea of reason and relation self-interpretation. It also explained the attribute of living with rapidly advancing societies. Since society has no conclusion, my thesis has no too. This is the first stand of my positionality. So here my question comes that after 1 year of an intended break from the baggage of my thesis, it was tried to look at the sectarian turn in the Salafi discourses, which uses the concept not only for the legitimacy or survival of the state only, but it instrumentalizes the concept for a worldwide homogenized society. It leads to assume that an expansive, diverse Salafism exists. So it simply means that in our own understanding of Salafism in our time, that we feel a kind of visual attack that Salafism is something bad, terrorism associated with terrorism, though it has some reality as well. So, and state politics also involves with that idea of Salafism, which will come later. In India, the case of Salafism causes to disassociate from the socio-political culture in which people subscribing to the idea of Salafism are born. This claim comes from the past 8 years' experience with two different kinds of ulama community who come from key Salafi madrasas in India, received their education from Saudi University and came back to in India. One kind of group are, and another group is educated in Indian madrasas, continued their education in Indian universities. The later community prefers to make a distance from the former because of its alleged reliance on imported religious opinion, absolute strictness, and perception of Saudi ulama society as pietistic. Unlike this, the ulama community of Salafis brought up in India prefer to produce a society shaped by understanding of the Quran, Hadith, Arab knowledge, and Indian culture, are quite open and contextual to the outer world. They are educated and aware of the cultural facts of Islam. For them, Islam encourages diversity so that they also recognize the Persianate society in India. Persianate society, exactly not the Persian society. Persianate society, which leads us to understand the entire Mughal rule in India or Mughal presence in India. With this, they are known for their contribution to meta-narrative of Indianness considered as anti-colonialism. It makes them celebrate their intellectual and physical struggle in time when national consciousness was not developed on the pattern of theoretical rhetorics of nation and nationalism. Thus, this is one of the basic problem of my paper here. The context of Salafism discourses. The term Persianate society is common among historians, most creatively used by Hodgson in Venture of Islam. It refers to the South Asian context of the later Mughal presence in India and its bureaucratic language as Persian. In this sense, the reference of Persianate cannot be taken as a frame to look at the sectarian tension between Shia and Sunnis in India, as it gives you a frame reference to look at cases of sectarianism in the Arab world. There are a range of literature in which cultural entanglement from different background, ethnicity, denomination within Islamic world emerged and expanded. In today's Salafi discourses in general, the cultural element of society could be source of materialism, filthy and dunyavi, or what people say that material, maddi. Hence, for Salafis, Mughals, Turks, and Arab Persians, for example, Abbasids could be closer to the Kufr or can be considered as Kafirs because they could not bring a welfareist political global solution Islam educated. For example, Caliphate. So there is sort of psychological feelings there, psychological problem is there in the entire consciousness Salafism provides to us. And the context into this discourse. Unlike the keyword judgment of contemporary Salafism on Muslim cultures, Salafis or Ahlul Hadith during the 18th and 19th century India hardly found any reason to decontextualize range of turas available in Muslim world. Hence, they could not consider Persianist society as their enemy. So for every Salafism in the market, including people exposed to Saudi universities, the sense of Muslimness belongs to the people who could reason according to the view of literatures developed in the context of the politics and society, excluding a large number of people from traditional fold of Islam. Similarly, from an individualized populist perspective in India, the cultural fold of Muslimness such as Arabs, Turks, and Persians are foreign to the world we are experiencing is an Orientalist colonial construct as well. And my last point is that in post-colonial societies, it has been argued to look at present context of sectarianism through instrumental use of religion. State plays with. Thus one can find a shift from post-colonial to post-colonial in state's behavior. That post-colonial is very important to understand that we were just discussing in the whole course. The post-colonial tricks or post-colonial techniques to introduce new ideas of sectarian or sectarian consciousness now is being used by the colonial or state, post-colonial states as well. So, sorry for the font of the word, I can read it here. The genealogy of the term of Salafism in India is very much connected with the Indian history as well, anti-colonial Indian history. The context of Salafism in India is unique because it has a very modern history. Historically, one finds the significance of the term Wahhabi in anti-colonial politics. Reformers such as Sayyid Ahmad Khan, Altaf Hussain Hali, and Sayyid Ahmad Shahid Barelvi are related to the idea of Wahhabism in one way or another because of their muzahama or resistance. Thus, the context of anti-imperialist mobilization is an important as sometime anti-colonial attitude of a person from different religion, as Hinduism was reported as Wahhabi. So, drawing their identity from conflict between Ahlul Rai and Ahlul Hadith people in Indian subcontinent finding themselves into the conceptual fold of Salafism call themselves as Ahle Hadith. Sometimes Wahhabi Salafi also include Deobandis, a sect from Maturidiya way of reasoning. Maturidiya this is the picture which suggests toward the secular project, what I call secularism as anti-sectarian project, Azmi Bishara just suggested on first day of the lecture. So, and Muslim thought in India. So, the person, with specs and cap is Maulana Abul Kalam Azad. He is considered as Ibn Taymiyyah of India. Another one in the middle is Jawaharlal Nehru, and after him is Gandhi. So Jawaharlal Nehru is known because what we have, what we understand as India, and Gandhi is the Queen of India. In modern India, we find several leaders from different socio-political, economic and intellectual background who joined the secular mode of thinking. It could be considered in response to the British presence from 1757 till 1947 as it tried to instigate people on the line of identities. For example, tradition versus modern, Hindu versus Muslims, Shurafa versus Rozala, Shia versus Sunnis. The instigation by Britishers worked as an imperialist policy is known as divide et impera or divide and rule. The formation of the Indian state was introduced on an imagined social harmony introduced during the Mughal period by King Akbar. In the picture, we see three significant figures whose image of India is India, the world is appreciating for years. The purpose of showing this picture is to highlight the context that how institutionalization of secularism through Indian constitution not only succeeded state to help people progress in society, but also allowed them to express their sense of freedom, religious and culture belonging. Indian secularism is quite different from secular experiences in other parts of the world, such as Arab world or Middle East and Europe. So now, is the main point of the paper. So I have tried to find something which is that global Salafis project is something for me, security something for me is kind of deliberate introduction through the, for example, you have been aware with Mac world versus Mac jihad, Mac world versus jihad. So everything is connected with idea of jihadi Salafism or violence-driven Salafism. So some researchers have argued that West Asian, Middle Eastern theology of sectarianism feeds South Asian social setup. Their argument suggests that how the state has a significant role in producing hyper-identities which reshape the whole image of the individual and collective belonging. The context which determines South Asian life in general and sectarian politics in particular draw their energies from the Soviet Afghan War, Iranian Revolution, Pakistan Syndrome, and 9/11. These are crucial contexts which provided a stronger effect on the Indian Muslim in general and Salafi in particular. However, the exciting part leads us to trace that during these phenomenal contexts, Muslim societies in India was performing through secular nationalist values. As Adam Sawley mentioned yesterday, that sectarianism is open to political manipulation. It is intended to argue that how a political force started playing its role in the Salafi discourse in India. So this is my major points in sectarian turn in the Salafi discourse. After independence, the idea of Salafism in India remained in the secular fold of the state. Having its relation with 18th to early 20th century struggle of ulama, anti-colonial history, Salafi's view of Islam was about thinking through Islamic texts within the framework defined by secular norms. So here is a religion which justifies or legalizes or legitimates the secular reasoning. In post-independence India, the Islamic texts became and used to justify trans-logic of religious movement happened mostly in Arbosphere. Thus, two cases, British and now Saudi Arabia, produced religious movement of Ibn Wahhab as the meta-narrative of contemporary Salafi discourses in India. So, on the contrary, the intellectual base of Indian Salafism more clearly agrees with Imam Shawkani, as earlier Toby mentioned. The sectarian turn in Salafi discourses in India is noticed by a sophisticated process mostly implemented in Salafi madrasas. This process suggests looking at the curriculum of madrasas which earlier used to teach Persian language and literature in continuation to maintain the culture belonging to the Persianate society, which was in India. However, for almost 40 years, the Persian language and literature on a rollback. I mean, even today, there is not a single teacher in Salafi madrasas who can teach Persian. A rough survey of pamphlets and journals in Urdu and Arabic of last 40 years provoke us to think about homogenization process. And this thing is based on my field work in 3 madrasas in Maharashtra, Delhi and Varanasi. This process on the one hand tried to decontextualize the political atmosphere in which Muslims live and started thinking for theological imperialism, which has no connection with the present situation of Muslims living in India. While on the other hand, the homogenization process transcends the Middle Eastern theology of sectarianism to subcontinent through a presence of active passive Salafism versus active passive Shiism. The context of passive is less visible and more like Cold War, while active part only appropriates Iran and Saudi Arabia for their respective interests in India. It also keeps the identity of Salafism coming from textual reasoning alive, provides enough knowledge about the divine background of Saudi Arabia and its service to the world. It also argued that a lumpen intelligentsia has captured religious thinking in India. For example, I'm sorry for the word the lumpen intelligentsia, but Oliver Oy has used this word. For example, Indian students graduated from Saudi universities communicate not in the language understandable to Indian societies. The formation of sectarian identities in Indian, particularly with the reference of Salafism, is identified with the same greater context of theological imperialism, known as pro-system reformist theologies defending Saudi Arabia, literalism, textual determinism, that text determines the life of human being. And pro-revolutionary theologies defending movements, intellectual response, and resistance. Former extracts its energies from reform-laden Sunni Muslim theology, while later rely on the combination of revolutionary theologies from Shia and Sunni together. As Fanar argued, that the scope of studying sectarianism is growing every day. It is a social and religious political sphere is expanding day and night. On another level, this is my last point, a tendency to purify the Indo-Persian language caused to form an identity defined in agreement to the text. Thus, some ulama were found to advocate for using, and this is most important point, I would like to recommend you to understand things in that way. Thus, some ulama were found to advocate for using word salah instead of namaz. Namaz is used in Urdu for salat. Saum instead of roza. I mean, there is kind of linguistic purification is going on. I mean, however, the sectarian turn in Salafi discourses suggests looking at the discourse as an attempt to decontextualize from Indian Persian history on the one hand and branding them as a subject of theological imperialism of Saudi Arabia. Trying to trace the sectarian movement in Salafi discourses, one finds that instead of imagining a particular world and correcting minds embodied by the worldview of Salaf Saleh or righteous mind, a politics is involved with the entire concept. In the name of narrating reformist tendencies, the politicized worldview presents a different model to the world. Hence, the rhetoric of a pure and moderate Islam is serving to higher imperialist theology too. The homogenization of Salafism discourse is the process Hashmi calls sectarianization, provides sequels of Shia antipathy against Sunnis, most through the context of politics from the Arab world, Sufi presence to play with fundamentalists of Islam in India and Pakistan, hatred against secularism drawing context of Arab experiences in Europe. Thus, the new agent added to Salafi discursive logic is called sectarianism. So, to these reasoning, I could draw some ideas from the case, from my case. So, my work is, the work is in progress, and I'm sorry for the paper that is not complete. So, I would like to receive comments, feedbacks, question, and rejection as well from you. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Saad. This is very interesting. Just let me preface my comments by what, if you were a smoker, would be health warnings on a packet of cigarettes. And it says smoking kills or smoking damages your health or something like that. I should say that comments by me are comments from a non-specialist, because I wasn't supposed to be the discussant. I was just chosen to replace Dr. Nader Hashemi. I hope that he's in a better place in terms of the emergency he had to face. So I'm actually speaking very much as an outsider. But that may not be actually a bad thing at all, in the sense that some of the most productive conversations take place between people between whom there is a huge information gap. Actually, the shorter the information gap between people, the conversation becomes futile. You will sort of wonder, why is it that husbands and wives who are very close to each other sometimes don't talk too much to each other? It's because they know everything about each other, right? And it is only when you know little about people that you start to, and about situations, that you start to ask questions, and to ask sometimes questions that are not acceptable to be part of what the specialist would talk about. So I'm here finding myself like a a little child who asks his father after the Jum'ah prayers, or the Jum'ah namaz, maybe I should say, does God exist? You see, because the child has no restrictions. They have not been socialized, acculturated into accepting certain answers and certain norms. So I'm going to start from that perspective, and I hope you'll bear with me. Secondly, I have a cold, and because it's a bad cold I brought back with me from Cambridge, I feel lightheaded. So that also adds to the information gap by a degree of fuzziness. So there's a fuzzy information gap. I'll try to fill it with one or two comments. First of all, to thank you for the paper and for the fact that you have tried to cover so much of the history of Salafism, between inverted commas, horizontally and also vertically. Horizontally from India, moving east to Iran and then to the Arab world, and then vertically starting from the 18th century and all the way up to the present moment. There's a thickness in this. This is a long and thick, it's not long and short, but long and thick terrain to try to cover. So thank you for the courage to have chosen it and to have wanted to come and share your thoughts and ideas with us. And then there is also what I think is commendable about your presentation is the fact that you try to engage different angles and perspectives of evaluation, which somehow enriches, complexifies what you're trying to do. And that is something we always look for in our work, but also in the work of our PhD students. How can you make something which is so simple become so resonant with meaning and so rich with meaning, then the complexity in the simplicity starts to emerge. So how can we make the simple resonate, speak, talk in multiple voices and in variations on that simplicity? And I think your project has the potential to move in that direction, and you've started to move in that direction. And thank you very much indeed for that. Now, there's always a sting in the tail. When you start to praise, then there is a but. And when the but comes, then it needs to be taken with an open sort of spirit. So I'm sure that you will be doing that. When I was called only at a short notice and was asked, there is discourse in the title of the paper. You're a sociolinguist. Can you please do the discussion for us, the job of the discussant for us in place of Dr. Nader Hashimi? I immediately, even with experience, sometimes I take leaps of faith into the dark. So I said, yes, I'll do it. Of course, there's discourse in it. So I agreed to do it because there was discourse in it. Mm-hmm. And then when the paper came, I started to look for the discourse. So my question to you is, what do you mean by discourse in the title of your paper? How do you define, where's the discourse? And are you talking about a textual analysis of key seminal sources, seminal speech events like speeches, sermons, whatever? And if you're talking about that, then what are the tools that you're using in order to give us an analysis and understanding of that discourse? Are you really merely doing content analysis? Mm-hmm. Or are you doing something else? Because you could do discourse by actually looking at how a text is put together, what kind of tools, what kind of means are used in order to deliver the message. So, for example, if you somehow play with the word order, the sort of canonical word order of a sentence in Arabic. Say you begin with the verb, then you move to the noun, and you just continue. Now, if you start with the noun, then you are saying, I am marking my speech. This is something that deviates, that is not part of the canonical way in which this kind of sentence is put together. So what are the things that you're using in order to get at that discourse? Are you getting at the form of the discourse or at the content of the discourse? I think what you're doing is getting at the content of this discourse, i.e. these texts, and what people are saying. But why should we call this discourse? It used to be content analysis. There was, for a long, long time, this is analyzing content, understanding, that's what it is. I mean, that's what literary critics do, that is what historians do, that's what everybody does. They take their data, they take their corpus, and they start to look at it, and they maybe do a word count, they do correlations, word associations. This word correlates with that word more than it does with that word in this particular context, and you start to see how the text hangs together. So I was expecting that, I might get something like this. And I must say that I thought, these political scientists, these people, when they use discourse, it's just used in a very sort of loose kind of term, kind of way. So it would be really interesting in your reflections in response to my very feeble comments to tell us what is meant by discourse. The second point in the title, of course, is turn. There are so many turns in modern scholarship. You have the cultural turn, you have the environmental turn, you have this turn, you have that turn. Everybody is turning. Mrs. Thatcher said in the past, the lady is not for the turning, all of those things. So what is it that we mean by turn? And when do we recognize a moment of change as a turn? A turn from what to what? And what are the factors, what are the things that incite a turn? And how does a turn manifest itself to us? From your paper, I thought you were talking about Salafism as something which is even pre-Islamic, as you've said to us. And then you talked about it. So Salafism has been with us. It's a chameleon-like kind of thing, a phenomenon. It's a chameleon-like. It seems to assume different tastes, different shapes, different colors under different contexts, right? So could we have had, for example, a Salafi turn 200 years ago, when Salafism turned from being an anti-colonial to something else, or from something else to being anti-colonial, anti-imperial. So for us, in terms of, this is not a methodological question, this is a conceptual question. So what is a turn? How do we recognize a turn? What brings about a turn? What is the outer shape of this turn? What are the main ideas inside the turn? So I thought that would be a really interesting thing to talk about. Now, having moved from the title when I received your paper, and now thank you for the presentation, which added more flesh to it. I thought, in what way can we make this sort of umbilical, it seems, connection between Wahhabism and Salafism? And to what extent can Salafism, through the mutations it has experienced in its own life in India, be continued to be called Salafism? At what point does Salafism mutate and become something that is neo-Salafism or post-Salafism? At what point? That is really also another sort of important sort of issue for me to try to understand what's going on. Now, when I thought that you were talking about, when I saw Salafism in it and the past, of course you expect the present, but you expect the counterpart term, which is modernity. It's only, in a sense, modernity, do we have to engage modernity in understanding Salafism? Or is modernity the present absent, as Mahmoud Darwish would say, al-hadir al-ghaib? Maybe we don't, but if we don't, then let's try to explain why we don't sort of engage modernity in understanding Salafism. Because Salafism, actually most things have to be defined in relation to something else. I'll be talking about that in my talk. I'll be saying something about that in my talk tomorrow. Let me just give you an example. If all cars were to be white, there would be no point in anyone saying that, oh, I have a white car. Right? And if, for example, you wanted to go to your son or your daughter, or to, my wife wants to say to me, go and fetch my car and all cars are white. And I say, well, oh, you've changed your car. I don't know which car it is. And she said, that white car. I say, well, that's no way of, you know. Nowadays, she could say this black car, this white car, you know, it's a black car. Then she might say to me, it's a Mercedes, or it's a Datsun, or a Honda, or whatever it is. So things have to be related, or to me, I understand them in relational terms. You know, what are other things? What are the other things that stand, as it were, on the other side of the concept or of the phenomenon that you're trying to describe? So my expectation, maybe it's the wrong expectation, maybe you could explain to me why I'm sort of wrong to expect there to be a counterpart to Salafism, which is something else. I don't know what that means in Islam. Is it Sufism? I get the impression you brought in Sufism, but not. I mean, you have the Bralavi and you have the Deobandi. So I was saying, you know, can I have a bit more context about India? Why is it that Salafism is moving from, if I understood your paper correctly, moving from the realm of action to the realm of text in India? I got the impression that it has become, the turn, maybe it has gone back to being textual rather than to being the source of action. Because maybe you could say to me, Salafism accrued negative connotations by virtue of being sometimes linked to terrorism, between inverted commas. Is it just that? Or is it, for example, something to do with the Indian context? And what is that context? Is it in terms of the relations of India to Saudi Arabia? I don't really know. What's interesting is this, you know, language purism that you brought in, replacing namaz by salah and saum by, what's the word for saum? The original word? No? Rosa and saum for fasting. It's a kind of weird purism, really weird purism, because you're replacing something which has been embedded linguistically in your Hindu, Urdu, whatever, to the extent it has been naturalized. You know, these words are naturalized. In the same way that when I meet, for example, my Swahili-speaking speaking friends here, and I love saying to them "Ahsanta sana," and they say "Karibu sana," and they say, "Oh, you know," I said, "No, Ahsanta sana. You've turned it into Ahsanta sana. You know, you think it's a Swahili, but in fact, for me, it's Arabic. I mean, say Karibu, and it's Karib for me. You know, so to me, namaz and the other word are rosa are really indigenous. They have become indigenous words in, you know. So is it a case that by trying to replace them with something which is in linguistic origins even more foreign, salah and so on, is it a case of cutting your nose to spite your face? Is it a case of replacing the less foreign with the more foreign? Or is it replacing the less something with something which is in Salafi textual terms more authentic? Because salah is the word that is used in the foundational text of Islam. Now, again, the link between Salafism, Wahhabism, Ahl al-Hadith. Is this relationship, how does it work? Because I'm not an expert, so I don't, you know, I understand it to some extent in the Arab context. Might it be the case that the fact that Salafism is in retreat in some respects, in retreat in this part of the world? Salafism in the past demanded, and Wahhabism demanded, that you should not listen to music and nobody should come and sing in a certain country. And nowadays, Salafism meant that the woman should not drive. I mean, what we see that in the heart of Salafism, geopolitical Salafism, there is a retreat from that kind of Salafism. Is India responding to it, or is it reacting against it? I don't really know. So there are many, many questions, which I think would be interesting to explore or to disregard. I mean, at the end of the day, this is your winter school. There's one thing which I understand from Dr. Adham you've talked about, and something which I'm really interested in pursuing a little with you, which has nothing to do with your talk, so don't worry about it. But you talked about it. This is my research question. When I was a PhD student in the UK, we were not actually taught to do research questions in the social and sciences and humanities, right? But then I knew that our scientists, they had sort of research questions. We had I'm interested in this. You knew the outer limits of what you are interested in. I'm interested in this particular phenomenon. Now I can tell you what my experience is with my PhD students. And I've supervised 62 PhD students. So I'm talking from real experience. Some of them are teaching here, the rest of it. Now, let me just say this to you. They come to me and they say, this is my research question. And I say, brilliant, just carry on. Then they just go and they come back and they say, oh, I've changed my research question. I say, brilliant, just carry on. Yeah. And then come and they say, oh, by the way, I think I want to tweak my research question. I say, absolutely brilliant. My son, my friend, you're on the right path. Just, because the textbook that you've bought in the airport tells you that you should do this. And those who teach you methodology tell you to do it. Right, okay. I understand that in certain respects, if you're writing a little paper. But if you're writing a thesis, so what is the research question? And I bet you, and I'm willing to bet you $1 million. I don't have $1 million, but I would like to do that, because I'm desperately trying to get some money to change my bicycle in Cambridge. So let me just say this. It would be really interesting for you as a project for the future to start with your research question at the beginning of your PhD and see how many times you change it. And then at the end of it, write your research question. And you will see that the question that at the end, you have written at the end, is not the question that you have started with. It is somewhere around it, but it's not that research question. Remember, actually sometimes the last thing you think about when you write your PhD, not to think about, but at the end of, when you've finished your PhD, you actually say, well, the title is not really 100%. And you say, I would like to apply for a change of title. And universities make it a little bit difficult because they'll have advertised that you're doing this research project. So, in fact, most of you will write the introduction when you have finished writing your PhD thesis. You will never, no one starts writing the introduction. So in fact, if you actually look at the outcome of your research, you will see that it does not chronologically and archaeologically start from the introduction. This is how it appears, right? But it doesn't start that way. So my question is this: to what extent can we really say, and I've done it with so many people, people who will die by the research question, and I say, yes, you need to have an idea. You need to actually think about it, and you need to make sure that it has enough direction in it. But is this a research question? Because I think if you start to accept this way of doing research, you'll find that you're cheating. You're cheating. You are ethically, you've signed an ethical declaration. If you actually write, if you actually were to get an ethical license for your title, for your question, and you're ethically bound not to change it without submitting a a reason why changing it, you'll find that every time you'll have to apply for an ethical approval for the change. Yeah, let's begin with something which is, I want to investigate this. I have this thing in my head, right? I want to make sure it is as precise as possible. And this is my question, with which I'm sort of feeling my way, and I'm going to change it. I think research in the social sciences and humanities, unless one's doing quantitative work, and you'll find it really would be interesting to reflect on what you do. You write a sentence, because the hardest thing is just to start writing a sentence, the first sentence. You'll have experienced this. I can tell you how I know that I should go and write the first sentence. So you write the first sentence. The first sentence immediately triggers in your head that I should really move in that direction. So you write the second sentence. And then you write the one that afterwards. And then actually this is how, then the paragraph, and then suddenly the research and your questions that are coming all the time, the avenues that you're opening for yourself all the time start to carry you forward. This is, in fact, I think what people do. But I don't think you'd be able to get any grant from any research council by saying there's somebody who's working in Doha who told us, oh, don't do this because this is dishonest, because nobody's going to give it to you. So fair enough, but let's not get too much hemmed on and also constrained by this idea of methodologically, we want to begin with a robust, watertight kind of question. It doesn't really, in the humanities and social sciences, begin that way. And you all know when the time for you to write comes. I can tell you when the time for me to write comes. I start to become restless. I start to become irritable. I withdraw inside myself, and I look for a relief. And the only relief is to just go and sit in front of my computer and start to work. And the moment I've written 2, 5, 6, 700 words, then suddenly my mood changes. I'm actually saying, alhamdulillah, and then I just carry on. That can't really be brought into the idea of a research question. Maybe because I haven't done what you have been taught to do, I should not have been allowed to publish what I have published, and I shouldn't have deserved the career I have had. Maybe I have been the most successful failure God has ever created. So thank you very much. I take it this is the first time you clap, yeah? For me? Is it? So this is shared. Thank you very much indeed. Were you applying for a job here? No, okay. Because I wanted to make sure that I know who you are so that mark it against you. Please just cut it out from the... Don't include it in the film because I might lose my job if I...
So should I respond?
Well, you can respond, yes, of course. Please do.
So, thank you for such a wonderful and valuable comments. So, my first response: does God exist? So my.
It's not my question. This is what my children ask me.
I mean, I feel like to respond in this way. In India, we feel sort of epistemological promiscuity. This is not sorry for the term, epistemological promiscuity. People think that they're two kind of different epistemology can coexist actually. So if you do not believe in God,
I do believe in God.
I mean, for example, if somebody
this is being recorded. I do believe in God, and I said to you, and let me just recap what I've said, is that because I have no connection with your subject directly, right? Mm-hmm. I feel I can ask questions which are similar to a child's question to their parents. That's what I've said. And that's not about my own belief. I believe in God. God, Allah, you do exist, and I believe in you. So.
Mm-hmm. Shukran jazeelan. So, thank you.
Because I'm appealing to higher authority, because that's what
mm-hmm. So, I was missing that methodological thing, that there is no methodology at all, because I was not exactly confused, but wanted to know that how methodology can be used here. So what is discourse? When you said that, what is discourse actually? So I was thinking the Foucauldian discourse or something like that. So I tried to keep it up with my philosophical teacher, who is Hans Georg Gadamer. He uses so many big thing and radical thing, but most of the time he is very much expert in philosophy of understanding. So I tried to use his philosophy of understanding in my PhD. So that baggage is still there. I'm sorry for that, but I'm missing that methodological thing. So simply, by discourse I mean in a term that extending the debate, that what is actually making Salafism so much powerful everywhere. I mean, so much global and so much like erasing everything. I mean, everywhere. So Salafism is like Coca-Cola, or you can understand, like everyday word. Salafism is new coin of the Middle East as well. So when people think that there is Daesh, it means Salafism. There is Wahhabism, it means Salafism. There is Pakistan in India. I mean, in India, every time Pakistan is there, so every time Salafism is also there, because Salafism contains so many jihadist activities which were done in Afghanistan and Iraq and all over the Muslim world. So that's sort of the tension. I mean, that thread, that hyper penetration, the sort of I mean, suddenly when you listen the words Salafism, you may feel like that it is hyper. So it often happens till that discourses of positivist discourses, whatever, one-side reasoning. I mean, you start thinking that in one way, like a horse is going in one direction with a hindrance on his eye or horse's eye. So that sort of reasoning always is going on with the idea of Salafism. That Salafism tries to purify the social spaces and tries to use political spaces, want to restore some caliphate and political thing. So you can raise a question that whether Salafism can exist in democracy, because democracy tries to keep everything in its own places. It doesn't believe in manifestation of religious manifestation. But in the case of India, democracy and secularism is quite different from Middle East or Europe, because the idea of secularism in India basically tells you that there is an equidistance from religion, all sort of religious belief. So equidistance the idea of secularism in India never tries to intervene into the intellectual process of communities in India. Intellectual process of the religion, for example, Christian, Muslims or Hindus. And the reason, for example, you cannot connect it with the recent phenomenon, because its ideology is totally anti-nationalist in certain sense, you can say. So this tension is still there, that how Salafism can be interpreted in one way or another way. So the entire industry of the Enlightenment and industry, you are more aware than me, that Enlightenment industry is such, I mean, Hans Georg Gadamer says that there is good enlightenment, bad enlightenment. Good enlightenment has destroyed so many things, traditions and all. So he also introduces that past is still relevant, and that makes me very much excited to the case of Salafism, because when he says that there is museum, and in the museum, when you enter the museum, you feel sort of your relation connected with the past. There is museumization of the past. So that museumization is already very much active in Salafi discourses. I mean, suddenly you go, whenever you try to declare yourself as Salafi, you strictly live with the idea of Salaf Saleh. I mean, early Islam. I mean, Salaf Saleh is early generations from the early Islam, 3 generations from early Islam. So that thing when activates in you, so you feel like, but suddenly entire market thing comes up. So this is a still going on project. I mean, so I'm sorry for that if I'm not not very much clear. So the turn, I mean, for me, the turn is focus on the identity. And identity for me is that we have a modern identity that everyone is lives in a particular sect, lives in a particular categories. I mean, the categories which were introduced through the entire modern project, modern imaginations. So that categories doesn't work in the case, even in the case of the West Asia, Arab world or West Asia. So that traditional elements of Salafism is still comes with you if you encounter them. And what extent mobilization and Salafism in India? I mean, I'm so sorry. So, do you engage modernity to understand? I mean, we have a very modern imagination of Salafism as well, though there is a baggage of tradition. For example, Rashid Azam Misri, he has done lots of work. He is considered as enlightened Salafism, Salafi al-Mustanira. People who try to appreciate, try to afford the reasoning West has produced, that scientific reasoning, for example. And through that thing, he tried to justify that, for example, the case of jinn. So he said, so small cells, small moleculars, they could be jinn. So there is still justification in Rashid Azam's interpretation of the Salafism of the Western modernity. For example, if you are too much rational, you cannot ignore each and everything according to. So there is a kind of conversation between modern tradition versus modern in the thought of Rashid Reza Misri. So in his Al-Manar. So for example, why is Salafism moving to realm of the text in India? For example, Som and Rosa, and why purism is there. For me, this is because of the one-way project to use the identity in favor of their legitimacy. For example, Saudi Arabia does funds lots. I haven't mentioned petrodollar thing from Saudi Arabia in the form of charities and help to organization in India. There is Jamiyat al-Hadith, a very big. There are almost 30 million population of al-Hadith or Salafis and Wahhabis. And all of the term now are used interchangeably, but among traditional people in India, they prefer to stick with the traditional idea of Salafism. For example, they do not prefer this Salafism because it comes through the capitalists and Saudi and so many global roots. It doesn't come through the local or from the indigenous sources. So it feels sort of tension. And Wahhabi thing is actually, there is a politics during the British rule in India. So every person who is a rebellion is considered as Wahhabi. So people try to escape this. I mean, Sir Sayyid Ahmad Khan, who is a modernist, and he founded Aligarh Muslim University, he considered himself, he tried to write, he tried to defend the idea of the Wahhabism because he tried to converse with the Western world. He was in Britain as well, saying that Wahhabism is simply the teachings of Sheikh Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, who introduced the Kitab al-Tawheed. And later generation, for example, Shah Ismail Shaheed tried to imitate that Kitab al-Tawheed into the local language, such as Urdu. So its name is Taqwiyatul Iman. The same book is there in the local language. So you can find an alternate of Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab as well. But it doesn't mean that they rejected Sheikh Abdul Wahhab in a way. But they have more connection with Imam Shawkani. For example, their rational or ijtihadic relation is more strong with Imam Shawkani from Yemen, a mujtahid scholar of the 18th century. So we also have the Shah Waliullah, for example, who was born the same year Sheikh Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab was born. and 1703. So that sort of, actually that is not a tension, that is a continuation of the Salafism. And more their experiences of India, Salafi experiences of India is very much based on resistance against the British and foreigners. But and now these experiences of Salafism means it introduces new identities, for example, and these new identities try to use kind of scriptural reasoning, or you can say that reasoning which lives only in the Quran, not related to the society. That's why Psalm thing and Rosa thing happens every time. And that you might feel that while in Europe, you feel like that every time halal and haram tension is there. So still these things just going on. And I'm sorry for taking too much time. You may ask some, if you have any question, comment, rejection. And the paper is in progress, so, and the paper also misses that methodology thing, which I would do later.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. The floor is open. The discussion is yours.